The plan was for a calm, relaxing weekend escape, just me and Livia on a road trip through some scenic backroads. We hadn't planned much, just a few days of driving through the countryside, exploring small towns and staying in a cozy cabin. A spontaneous trip, something to break away from the routine. We both needed it. We set off in the late afternoon on Friday, the car loaded with snacks and bags stuffed with our clothes. The sky was that perfect shade of deep orange as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over everything, the kind of light that made you feel like you were in a painting. Livia was taking pictures with her phone, capturing the beauty of the fields and trees as they rolled by. "I love this," she said, smiling as she showed me a photo of the road ahead. "Just us, no stress. It's perfect." I agreed. Exactly what we needed. No work, no distractions, just peace. The first few hours of the drive were easy, filled with laughter and light conversation. We passed small towns, their main streets lined with quaint shops and winding roads that cut through forests and fields. The farther we went, the fewer cars we saw. Soon we found ourselves on a narrow two-lane road surrounded by thick trees, the sky now fading into dusk. "I think we're getting close," I said, looking at the GPS. The cabin should be another 30 minutes away. The road ahead was empty, not a single car in sight. The trees loomed on either side, casting long shadows as the last bit of daylight slipped away. A chill began to settle in the air, and I turned up the heat in the car just a notch. As we drove deeper into the forested area, I started noticing how quiet it was. The usual background noise of the city was long gone, replaced by the soft hum of the tires on the asphalt. "Creepy, huh?" Livia said, peering out the window. "It's like we're the only ones out here." "Yeah," I agreed. "We're in the middle of nowhere after all." We hadn't seen another car for miles when, suddenly, something appeared in the distance, small flashing lights bouncing in the darkness. And as we got closer, I saw the unmistakable glow of orange traffic cones. Up ahead, the road was blocked by several cones, and a man was standing beside them, waving a flashlight toward us. He wore what looked like a uniform, though it was hard to tell in the dim light. "Roadblock?" Livia asked, leaning forward. "There's no construction marked on the GPS," I said, slowing down the car. We came to a stop a few feet away from the cones, and the man approached the driver's side. I couldn't see his face clearly, but something about him made me uneasy. The uniform wasn't quite right. It looked more like a cheap security outfit than something official. The flashlight beamed directly in my eyes as he gestured for me to roll down the window. "Sir," he said, "I need you to step out of the vehicle." Immediately, alarm bells went off in my head. What kind of cop asks you to step out of the car without giving a reason? There wasn't a police car in sight, and his uniform. Something was seriously wrong. I looked at Livia. She didn't say anything, but her eyes were wide, and she slowly shook her head. "This doesn't feel right," she whispered. My hand hovered over the window button. "What's the problem, officer?" I asked. "There's a situation up ahead," he said, leaning closer to the window. The flashlight was now inches from my face, the glare blinding. "We need you to step out so I can check your license and registration." I shifted in my seat, looking at Livia again. "This doesn't make any sense," she whispered. "Why would he need you to get out?" "I don't know," I whispered back, my stomach tightening. The man tapped on the window with his flashlight again, this time with more urgency. "Sir, I'm not asking. Get out of the vehicle now." Livia's grip tightened on my arm. "Lock the doors," she said firmly. I didn't hesitate. My hand shot to the door controls, locking all the doors. The man's face darkened, his expression hardening as he realized what I'd done. "Sir, I'm ordering you to get out of the vehicle," he said, his voice more aggressive now. I didn't respond. Instead, I looked at the cones in front of us, and then at the narrow shoulder of the road. There was just enough space to maneuver around them if I was careful. I shifted the car into reverse, and as soon as I started backing up, the man's demeanor changed completely. He stepped back from the car, his face twisted in anger. "What are you doing?" he shouted, banging on the hood with his flashlight. "We're leaving," I muttered under my breath. As soon as I had enough space, I turned the wheel sharply and maneuvered around the cones, my tires crunching on the gravel shoulder as I veered back onto the road. The man was shouting something behind us, but I couldn't make out the words. I just floored the gas and didn't look back. Livia was breathing heavily beside me, her hand gripping the seat. "What the hell was that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I said, looking in the rearview mirror, "but I'm calling the police." I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 while keeping my eyes on the road. The dispatcher picked up quickly, and I explained what had happened as best as I could. We were stopped by someone posing as an officer. It wasn't right. He wasn't official. "Can you give us your location?" the dispatcher asked, her voice calm and professional. "Somewhere near Route 12, just off the main road." "We're heading north now," I replied, my hands shaking slightly as I gripped the steering wheel. The dispatcher was silent for a moment. "We'll send someone out to check the area. Stay on the line and don't stop until you're somewhere safe." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Livia was still looking over her shoulder as if expecting to see headlights racing after us. "Are they following us?" she asked, her voice a mixture of fear and disbelief. "No, I don't think so," I said, though I wasn't entirely convinced. My eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, expecting to see the man's car barreling down the road behind us. We drove for what felt like an eternity, the trees on either side blurring into the night as I pushed the car faster. Eventually, we reached a small gas station at the edge of a tiny town. I pulled in, parking under the bright lights of the station's canopy. The sense of relief that washed over me was overwhelming. The dispatcher stayed on the line until I told her we were safe. She assured me that officers were already on their way to check the area where we'd encountered the man, but I wasn't sure how much comfort that gave me. Livia and I sat in the car for a few minutes, neither of us saying a word. My mind was racing with questions. Who was that man? What had he wanted? And how close had we come to something much worse happening? Eventually I turned to Livia. "You okay?" She nodded, though her face was pale. "I don't know what would have happened if we'd gotten out of the car." "I don't want to think about it," I said. We sat there in silence for a few more minutes before finally deciding to continue on to the cabin. We were both shaken, but there was nowhere else to go, and the thought of turning back was just as unsettling as pushing forward. When we finally arrived at the cabin, the place that was supposed to be our cozy retreat now felt too remote, too isolated. Every little noise outside made me jump, and Livia kept the blinds tightly shut. We didn't talk about what had happened, but it hung in the air between us, unspoken but heavy. The next morning, I got a call from the local police. The officer on the other end told me they had sent an undercover unit to the spot where we'd encountered the roadblock. When they arrived, they arrested the man who had been trying to stop us. But that wasn't the worst of it. There were 3 more men hiding behind the bushes, all waiting for the right moment to ambush whoever fell for their trap. The officer explained that this group had been targeting people on isolated roads for weeks. "You two were smart to trust your instincts," he said. "Things could have ended much differently." I thanked him and hung up the phone, feeling a mix of relief and disbelief. Livia and I packed up to leave, both of us quieter than usual. "We were lucky," she finally said, breaking the silence. "Yeah, more than lucky." As we drove home, the weight of what could have happened lingered in the air between us. I couldn't stop thinking about how close we'd come to something truly horrific. It was just another Thursday night. My friend Tara had thrown a little gathering at her place, a typical low-key evening of pizza, board games, and catching up. Nothing crazy. I'd stayed a bit longer than I intended, mostly because we got into a heated debate over a card game. But when I saw it was almost midnight, I figured it was time to head home. I lived about 45 minutes out, down a stretch of rural highway that was usually deserted at night. The kind of road where you see more deer than cars. I didn't mind, though. In fact, I always liked these late-night drives. They gave me time to think, and the lack of traffic meant I could just relax and cruise home. So I said my goodbyes, grabbed the leftover pizza I'd managed to snag, and got in my car. The air was cool, and the stars were out. Nothing but clear skies, and that calm, peaceful silence you only get in the country. I pulled out of Tara's driveway and made my way toward the highway. For the first 20 minutes or so, it was smooth sailing. Just me, the road, and my thoughts. I had the radio on low and was already making mental plans for what I needed to get done the next day. That's when I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. I didn't pay it much attention at first. It was rare to see another car out this late, but it wasn't unheard of. Maybe someone else was just driving home from a late shift or coming back from a party. But then the lights started to get closer and fast. I checked my speedometer. I wasn't speeding. I was actually going a few miles under the limit, but this car was still gaining on me. The headlights stayed on my tail for another minute or two before they started flashing. Red and blue. "Are you kidding me?" I muttered to myself. It was just after midnight, and I wasn't even doing anything wrong. I'd heard of cops cracking down on late-night drivers for minor infractions, but this seemed excessive. Still, I wasn't about to argue. Maybe I had a taillight out or something. I signaled and pulled over onto the shoulder. The car behind me followed, but something didn't sit right. They hadn't turned their headlights down to low beam, which cops usually do, so they don't blind you when they walk up to your car. I squinted into the mirror, trying to get a better look, but all I could see was a shadowy figure behind the wheel. The engine of the car behind me cut out, and I heard a door open. My stomach twisted a little, but I brushed it off. I'd never been pulled over before, but I knew the drill: hands on the steering wheel, polite, cooperative, and no sudden movements. I looked around the car to make sure everything was in order. Nothing to worry about. Then I saw him. The figure walking toward my car wasn't in a uniform. No reflective vest. Nothing that even remotely resembled what a cop should wear. He was in dark clothes, jeans, and a jacket, and he had a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. The way he moved made me feel uneasy, like something was wrong. He wasn't carrying a flashlight either, which seemed odd, given how dark it was. Cops always carried flashlights on nighttime stops, right? That's when I started feeling a bit uneasy. Still, I tried to stay calm. Maybe he was just an undercover cop, or maybe he didn't need a flashlight because the headlights were lighting up the car. It could have been anything. The guy came up to the window, and I rolled it down just an inch. "Evening," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You know why I pulled you over?" he asked. His voice was deep, gravelly, but not in a cop kind of way. More like someone who smoked too much or didn't care about being polite. "No, I don't," I replied. I wasn't speeding or anything. He didn't answer me right away. Instead, he leaned closer, his eyes scanning the inside of my car like he was looking for something. That's when the alarm bells in my head really started going off. Cops didn't just stare into your car without at least explaining why they stopped you. And then I noticed something even more unsettling. No badge. There was nothing on his chest, no name tag, no indication that he was anything official. My hand went to my phone on instinct, fingers brushing over the screen, but I didn't pick it up. Not yet. "You need to step out of the car," he said. My heart started racing, and I looked in my rearview mirror, trying to see if there was anyone else in the car behind him. But it was empty. Just him, standing in the darkness, telling me to get out of the car. "I don't feel comfortable with that," I said, my voice a little firmer now. "Can I see your badge or ID?" For a split second, his expression changed. His eyes narrowed, and I could see his jaw clench. "Just step out of the car," he repeated, this time more insistent. "No," I said, my hand now gripping my phone. "Not until you show me some ID." Without warning, he slammed his hand on my window, making me jump. The whole car shook from the impact. "Open the door," he shouted, his voice now loud and angry. I didn't waste another second. I locked the doors, rolled up the window, and grabbed my phone, dialing 911 as fast as my fingers would let me. My hands were shaking, but I managed to press the call button. The guy outside my window started banging harder, his face inches from the glass. "I'm being pulled over by someone who's claiming to be a cop, but I don't think he is," I said, my voice trembling as I spoke to the dispatcher. "I'm on Old Mill Road, about 5 miles from town." "Stay in your car," the dispatcher said immediately. "Can you describe the vehicle?" I looked back, trying to get a better look. It was an old sedan, unmarked, with a cheap-looking light bar on top. Definitely not a police cruiser. It's an unmarked sedan, and the guy isn't in uniform. "Stay on the line," she said again. "There are no officers in your area right now. Help is on the way." My heart nearly stopped when she said that. No officers in the area? That meant whoever this guy was, he wasn't a cop. I looked back at him, and he was on his phone now, pacing beside his car. His face was twisted with frustration, and I could see him looking at me every few seconds. Suddenly he turned around, stormed back to his car, and jumped inside. The headlights went out, and he sped off into the night, disappearing down the road. I stayed on the phone with the dispatcher until real cops arrived about 10 minutes later. They checked me over, took my statement, but there wasn't much they could do. The guy was long gone, and there weren't any cameras on that stretch of road. I went home that night, but I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that guy's face, his hand slamming against my window. I thought about what would have happened if I'd gotten out of the car or if I hadn't called 911. A few days later, the cops followed up with me. They thanked me for calling 911 and told me I'd done the right thing, but it didn't make me feel any better. From that night on, I stopped driving that road after dark. Even now, months later, I still get uneasy when I see flashing lights in my rearview mirror. I know it's probably a real cop, but I can't shake the memory of that man, his face, his voice, the way he tried to control the situation. He might be gone, but I'll never forget that night. It happened when I was 16. I was walking home from school, taking my usual route through the residential streets. I liked walking. Plus, I lived close enough that it never seemed like a hassle. The sidewalks were lined with tall trees, and the sun was starting to set, but there was nothing particularly out of the ordinary about it. It was just another walk home, or so I thought. I noticed the car before I noticed the man. It was a black sedan, older but well kept. It didn't look particularly out of place, just another car parked along the side of the street. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A man was standing beside the car, wearing what looked like a police uniform. He was tall, and with a stiff posture that gave him an air of authority, but there was something about him that didn't sit right with me. His uniform didn't quite fit, and he wasn't wearing a badge. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just someone out for a walk, or maybe a plainclothes officer, but something about the way he was watching me made me feel uneasy. I kept walking, trying not to make eye contact, but I could feel his gaze following me. As I passed, I heard his footsteps behind me. "Hey, miss!" His voice was deep, commanding, the kind of voice that usually made you stop in your tracks. But I didn't. I kept walking, quickening my pace a little. "Miss!" he called again, more insistent this time. "I need to talk to you." Against my better judgment, I turned around. The man was walking toward me now, a serious look on his face. "You fit the description of a runaway," he said, his tone flat and emotionless. "I'm going to need you to come with me." Runaway? That didn't make any sense. I wasn't even dressed in a way that would suggest anything like that. My school uniform, backpack, everything about me screamed student, not someone on the run. And why would a lone officer, without a patrol car in sight, be handling something like this on foot? "I'm not a runaway," I replied. "I'm just walking home from school." He didn't seem to care. His hand reached out, grabbing my arm in a way that was far too forceful. "I'm going to need you to come with me," he repeated, his grip tightening. "You can explain everything at the station." At that moment, everything inside me screamed that this wasn't right. This wasn't how police handled things, especially not in the middle of a suburban street, without any backup, no car, and no explanation other than his vague statement. "I need to call my mom first," I stammered, trying to pull away from his grip. "She'll clear everything up. You don't need to call anyone. Let's go." The panic overwhelmed me. His face, his voice, his insistence. It all felt wrong. I yanked my arm free with all the strength I had, surprising both him and myself. Without thinking, I bolted. I didn't look back. I just ran. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to get away from him. I spotted a house a few blocks down, lights on in the windows, and made a beeline for it. I banged on the door. My mind raced with a million different thoughts, the dominant one being that I couldn't let him catch me. I couldn't let him take me. The door swung open, and a middle-aged woman stood there. "Please help me," I cried. "A man is trying to take me." Before I could say anything else, she pulled me inside and shut the door. I could feel my body shaking, adrenaline coursing through me as I tried to explain what had happened. "He said he was a cop," I managed between breaths, "but I don't think he really is. He grabbed me." The woman wasted no time. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911 while her husband stood by the window, peeking through the curtains to see if the man was still out there. I looked too, but didn't see the man anywhere. Within minutes, the real police arrived. They took my statement, asking questions about the man, what he had said, and what he looked like. I gave them everything I could remember: the black sedan, the ill-fitting uniform, the way he had grabbed my arm. They assured me that they would look into it, but I could see the concern in their eyes. They told me that similar reports had been coming in from nearby neighborhoods over the past few weeks. A man posing as a police officer, targeting young women, walking alone. They drove me home that night, and my parents were beside themselves with worry when they found out what had happened. My mom hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, and my dad's face was pale, his usual calm demeanor shaken. For the next few days, I couldn't shake the experience. Every time I walked outside, I found myself scanning the street for that black sedan, for the man in the fake uniform. My heart would race every time I saw someone who looked even remotely like him. A week later, the police came back with news. They had found the man's car abandoned in a nearby parking lot, but there was no sign of him. Inside the car, they found police equipment, fake badges, uniforms, even a siren light for the dashboard. It was clear that whoever he was, he had been planning these encounters for a while, but they never found him. He just disappeared, leaving behind nothing but questions and the lingering fear that he could still be out there, waiting for his next target. Looking back, I'm grateful that I trusted my instincts that day. I've learned that when something feels off, it probably is. I could have been another statistic, another missing person case, but instead, I ran. And that made all the difference. For weeks after, the eerie sense that he was still out there, watching and waiting, wouldn't leave me. Every car that passed by, every figure I saw in the distance, sent a shiver of paranoia through me. My parents were just as cautious, never letting me walk home alone, never letting me forget how close I'd come to something terrible. The story spread through the neighborhood, and for months there were whispers about the man in the black sedan. People started to speculate. Was he someone local? Did he know his victims beforehand? Some neighbors claimed to have seen him in other areas, lurking around schools and parks, always keeping his distance, but never far enough to go unnoticed. But what scared me the most was the fact that, despite all the reports and sightings, no one could ever give a concrete answer about who he was. He just vanished. It made me wonder if he had done this before, maybe in a different city, a different town. Had he succeeded before? And if so, how many others hadn't been as lucky as I was? I don't walk home alone anymore, and I've become much more aware of my surroundings. This happened years ago, and I still think about that man sometimes. I wonder if he's still out there, if he's still using that fake badge, still trying to lure unsuspecting girls into his trap. I don't think I'll ever forget the way his hand felt, gripping my arm, pulling me towards something unknown and terrifying. It's a reminder that danger doesn't always look like a monster in the dark. Sometimes it wears a uniform. Sometimes it pretends to be the very thing you're supposed to trust, and that's what makes it truly terrifying. It was supposed to be just another quiet evening at home. Gwen and I had settled in for the night, the kind of peaceful evening we'd come to love after moving into our new place. We were still getting used to the neighborhood, but it had a comforting, quiet vibe that made it feel safe. Most nights, we'd have dinner, watch a movie, and then head to bed without a second thought about the world outside. But that night was different. I was sitting on the couch, watching some late-night show while Gwen dozed off next to me. We'd both had long days at work, and we were more than ready to call it a night. The clock on the wall read 10:45 p.m., late enough for us to start winding down, but not so late that we were totally out of it. The world outside was still, no cars passing by, no neighbors out walking their dogs, just quiet. That's why, when we heard the knock on the front door, it was so jarring. Gwen stirred next to me, her eyes fluttering open. "Did you hear that?" "Yeah. Who's knocking at this time?" We exchanged a look. Nobody in the neighborhood had any reason to be at our door this late. My first thought was, maybe it was a neighbor in some kind of trouble, or maybe it was a package delivery, although that didn't make much sense at this hour. I stood up, Gwen sitting up as well, and made my way to the door. I'm not usually one to get paranoid, but something about a late-night knock gets under your skin. I looked through the peephole before opening the door, hoping to get a look at who it was. There, standing in the dim light of our porch, was a man in what looked like a police uniform. He wasn't young, probably in his early 40s, with a clean-shaven face and a cap pulled low over his forehead. The uniform looked legit enough, navy blue with patches on the shoulders, a shiny badge on his chest. But the second I looked at him, a strange sense of unease crept in. Something wasn't quite right. I didn't open the door all the way, just cracked it enough to speak. "Can I help you?" "Good evening," the man said, his voice low and calm. "I'm Officer Barnes with the local police. We've had reports of a disturbance in the neighborhood, and I need to come inside and ask you a few questions." A disturbance? We hadn't heard anything, and the idea of police investigating something this late without any warning felt off. Still, I kept my voice even. "What kind of disturbance?" "We haven't seen or heard anything." The man's eyes flicked to the side, almost like he was checking the street. "It's routine. I just need to make sure everything is okay in the area. Do you mind if I come in?" That's when the unease turned into something sharper. He hadn't shown any ID, and now that I looked closer, his uniform seemed weird. It was almost too clean, too pressed. The badge on his chest had no name, just a generic police emblem. Gwen was behind me now, peeking around the corner. She could sense something was wrong, too. I didn't move to open the door further, and instead I asked, "Can I see your badge and ID?" For a moment the man didn't respond. His face stayed neutral, but there was something behind his eyes, something hard. "I'm in uniform, sir. I need you to cooperate and let me inside." Gwen stepped closer, her hand on my arm. "Do you think we should let him in?" she whispered, though her voice held clear doubt. I shook my head slightly. "I don't think so. Sir, ma'am, this is official police business. You don't want to make this harder than it needs to be." That did it. The way he said it, like he was giving us an ultimatum, sent alarm bells blaring in my head. Real officers didn't act like this, at least not without offering some form of ID. I took a step back and pulled the door halfway shut. "If this is official business, I'll call the station and confirm," I said. "If you're really here for something, we'll cooperate." The man's face darkened. He stepped closer to the door, his voice dropping to a low, almost threatening growl. "Sir, I'm not asking again. Open the door. At that moment, my instincts kicked into high gear. This wasn't a cop. I didn't know who he was or what he wanted, but he wasn't with the police. I stepped back fully, pulling the door shut and locked it. Without missing a beat, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. Gwen was standing next to me now, her face pale. What's happening? Is he still there? I held the phone to my ear as it rang. I don't know, I whispered. But something's not right. When the dispatcher picked up, I quickly explained what was happening, that a man claiming to be a police officer was at our door, demanding to come inside, but refusing to show any ID. Stay on the line, the dispatcher said. Do not open the door for anyone. We have no officers assigned to your area tonight. That sent a jolt of fear straight through me. None, I asked, my voice louder than I intended. None, the dispatcher repeated. We're sending a unit to your location right now. Stay inside and keep your doors locked. I hung up and looked at Gwen, who was staring at the door with wide eyes. They said there are no cops in the area. Her face went white. Then who is he? We both stood there, frozen for a moment, listening. There was silence from the other side of the door. I took a step forward and peered through the peephole again. The man was still there, but now he was pacing on the porch, muttering something under his breath. His whole demeanor had changed from calm to agitated. He kept looking toward the street, like he was waiting for something. Suddenly he stopped and looked directly at the door. Even though he couldn't see me, it felt like his eyes locked onto mine through the peephole. He took a step toward the door again, and my heart skipped a beat. Sir, I know you're still there, he said, his voice louder now, more aggressive. Open the door. We need to talk. I backed away from the door, shaking my head. I don't think so. The man grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the living room. What do we do? She asked. We wait, I said. The real police are on their way. But as I said the words, doubt crept in. What if this guy didn't wait? What if he tried to force his way in? I didn't want to think about it, but the thought was there. Minutes passed like hours as we stood there, waiting for the sound of sirens, waiting for anything that would make this nightmare end. The man knocked again, harder, but we didn't move. I wasn't about to give him another chance to get inside. Finally, we heard the distant wail of sirens approaching. The man on the porch must have heard it too because he stopped knocking. I peeked through the peephole one last time and saw him walking away from the door, his pace quickening as he disappeared into the shadows. The real police arrived moments later, 2 officers in full uniform. They knocked on the door, and this time, when I looked through the peephole, I saw the real thing. Badges, name tags, everything in place. I opened the door cautiously, relief flooding through me as they introduced themselves and stepped inside. After explaining what had happened, the officers told us they'd searched the area for the man. They didn't find him, of course. People like that don't just wait around to be caught. He probably wasn't working alone, one of the officers said. Sometimes they have someone waiting around the corner, ready to move in if things go wrong. That thought made my stomach churn. We were lucky, I realized. Lucky we hadn't opened the door. Lucky we trusted our instincts and called for help before things could go any further. When the police left, Gwen and I sat on the couch, still shaken but thankful that the night had ended without anything worse happening. I can't believe that happened, Gwen said softly, staring at the locked door. Right here, in our neighborhood. Neither can I, but from now on, we trust ourselves before anything else. And that's exactly what we did. From that night on, we were more careful, more aware of the world outside our door. We installed extra locks, set up cameras, and made a pact to never let our guard down, because you never know who might be knocking. If these stories left you questioning who's really behind the badge, you're not alone. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss the next creepy stories. Trust your instincts and always stay cautious when something feels off. Have you ever experienced something like this? Drop your story in the comments. I want to hear all about it. Stay safe, Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.